As an aspiring real estate investor, you probably understand the importance of being able to accurately determine the value of a property. If you get this valuation step right, then it ensures you only buy good deals. But if you get this step wrong, you could end up buying a property that you lose money on. And most investors won't buy a property that they know will cost them money instead of making them money. So in today's video, I'm going to walk you through the process I follow to determine both the potential sales value of a property as well as the potential rent value of a property. Hey guys, my name's Tony J. Robinson, and I am the co-host of the Bigger Pockets Real Estate Rookie podcast, and I've used the process I'm about to share with you to determine the potential value of every single property that I've purchased. What I'm going to show you is truly a foundational skill that every new investor needs, so let's get started. Now, let's start by defining a few terms to help lay the foundation for the rest of this conversation. One of the phrases you'll hear me use often is subject property. And this is basically the property that you're thinking about buying. So when you hear me say subject property, just think, here's a property that I want to buy. Now, next, let's define what a sales comparable is. A sales comparable, or sales comp for short, is a property that's used to determine the value of your subject property. There are some requirements a property must meet in order to be called a sales comp, but we'll get into that later. But the sales comp basically tells you what people might be willing to pay to purchase your subject property. Next, let's define what a rental comp is. While your sales comp tells you how much people are willing to pay to purchase your subject property, the rental comp tells you how much people are willing to pay to rent your subject property. So you can see how those two kind of go hand in hand. You'll need both the sales comp and the rental comp to accurately analyze a potential deal. All right, so now that we've defined all those key terms, let's talk about how you're supposed to identify and use these different types of comps. Let's talk about the sales comp first. Choosing a sales comp and using it to determine the value of your subject property is part art, part science. It's also kind of partially subjective, and two different professionals can come up with two different sales comp figures. But I'll outline kind of the basics that every sales comp should consider. The first thing you should consider is distance. You want your sales comp to be as close to your subject property as possible, ideally within a mile, but this may change depending on your market. Now, if you're in kind of a more rural location, then this radius is a little bit larger. If you're in a densely populated area, then it may need to be smaller. Next is age. Your sales comp and your subject property should be built within about 10 years of each other. A home that was built today shouldn't be compared to a house that was built 3 decades ago, even if all else is exactly the same. Most buyers tend to prefer newer homes and are willing to pay a bit more of a premium for something that's a little bit newer. The third factor when choosing a sales comp is square footage. The general rule of thumb is that you want your square footage of your sales comp to be within, call it plus or minus 20% of your subject property. Again, people are willing to pay a premium for larger properties. A house that's 2,500 square feet will typically sell for more than a house that's 1,000 square feet. After square footage, you want to consider the property type. And what I mean by that is this. If your subject property is a detached, single-family home, then your sales comp should also be a detached, single-family home. If your subject property is a duplex, then get a sales comp that is also a duplex. Different property types are valued differently, so this is a box that you absolutely have to check. After property type, you need to compare the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. You ideally want the same exact bedroom count, but being off by one is maybe acceptable. You have a little bit more flexibility with the bathrooms, but ideally, no more than a difference of one here also. Style is the next important thing to consider. Your subject property and sales comp should be the same style of home, meaning if your subject property is a 2-story, then your sales comp should be a 2-story. If your subject is a split level or a ranch, then you want to compare it to a split level or a ranch. Last but not least is sell date. You want the sell date for your comp to be as recent as possible so that you have the most accurate representation of where the market stands today. Even if the sales comp has the same age, square footage, and like everything else that I just listed as your subject property, if it sold 10 years ago, then it can't be a comp for today. because most markets will have changed quite a bit over that time frame. And the price that someone was willing to pay for a property 10 years ago is definitely not the same as what someone was willing to pay for it today. It could be lower, it could be higher, but either way, it will not be the same amount. Really quick guys, before we keep moving, if you're enjoying this video, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. Also be sure to hit the little bell, that way you get notified whenever we drop a new video. Also, feel free to connect with me on Instagram. You can find me at Tony J. Robinson. Okay, so now that you know what data points to look for, let's talk about where you should be looking to find your comps. The easiest places are sites like Zillow and Redfin, and you can really just kind of filter down to the properties that have recently been sold and pick and choose the best comps from there. You can also go with paid resources like PropStream, which will make it a little bit easier to quickly identify the right sales comps. And the last place you can go is just talking to your agent, but typically the agent route takes a little bit more time than finding that information on your own. All right, so now that you've selected a few sales comps, the last and final step is to use those comps to determine the value of your subject property. Now, it's not as simple as just trying to take the average price for all of your comps. There's a little bit more work that has to be done. First, you have to make some adjustments based on the differences between your sales comps and your subject property. So let's get into what some of those differences are and how you account for them. Say your first sales comp was slightly larger than your subject property. Then you might deduct $5,000 from the sales price of that comp to adjust for the smaller size. And say that your second sales comp had 2 bedrooms, but the subject property has 3. Then you might add $2,500 to the sales price of that comp to adjust for the additional bedrooms in your subject property. Making these adjustments isn't an exact science either, but as you get more familiar with your market and better understand what properties will sell for, you'll be more confident in ballparking some of these numbers. Now, if you're really stuck, which is totally okay, this is how I felt when I got started as well, and I still kind of do this from time to time when I'm in new markets, you can ask your agent what their thoughts are, or I think the best way is if you can get your hands on someone else's appraisal reports, right? Ask another real estate investor in that market to see what their appraisal reports look like, so you can see how the professional appraiser made their adjustments. Once you've made all of your price adjustments to your sales comps, then you can take the average price of your sales comps to determine the value of your subject property. And that's it. The actual process for finding a rental comp is almost the exact same process as finding a sales comp. You want to go through and find properties that have similar characteristics to your subject property. The only difference here is that instead of looking for properties that have recently sold, you're looking for properties that are currently listed for rent or that were recently listed for rent. There are a few ways you can find those properties. You can still search on Zillow and Redfin, but you'll just change your filter to look for properties that are for rent instead of properties that have recently sold. BiggerPockets also offers a really cool tool called BP Insights, where you can plug in a property's address and it'll give you a ton of data on other rental properties in that area. And you'll get to see what the current rental listings are, what their current prices are, but you'll also be able to see listings that were up but were taken down because the vacancy was filled. That data is super important because it's kind of a better indicator of what someone actually pays to rent a property, not just what the property is currently listed for. So there you have it. Using your sales comps and rental comps, you'll be able to accurately understand the value and the rent potential of a property before you decide to purchase it. Thanks again for hanging around until the end. And if you guys have any questions about sales comps or rental comps, or maybe if you have your own unique strategy for finding comps, then drop them in the comments below. And last, if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the little bell for notifications. Lastly, if you guys would like to connect with me on Instagram, you can follow me at Tony J. Robinson. So thankful you guys hung out with me today, and I will see you all in the next video.